Today we'll be working in my workbook called Nehemiah Part 1, and this is Rebuilding the Wall. This covers Nehemiah 1 through 7. I also have the second part of Nehemiah done as well. A little bit of history, and we've talked about this a little bit. Basically, the Restoration of Israel series. You could include Daniel in that, my book of Daniel, but basically, it's when Cyrus issues the decree for Jerusalem to be rebuilt. Then a first group under Zerubbabel goes to Jerusalem, and they eventually rebuild the temple. It takes time, but they do rebuild the temple. Then a second group of Jews return, about 5,000 exiles under Ezra. And so Ezra isn't really part of the first group, even though it's listed in the book of Ezra. And so the second return is under Ezra. And so the book of Ezra has those two that, but remember, the second return of Ezra is after the story of Esther. So the book is actually split in two, and Esther being in the middle of it. Then after that, we have now Nehemiah, who's returning with the exiles, which hasn't happened yet in our workbook here that we're working on. But looking at the table of contents, we've taken care of chapter 1, and that's basically Nehemiah is presented with the problem. That is, Jerusalem's walls are destroyed and are shambles. And God puts a burden on his heart about that. And so he prays and fasts and stuff. But he is, of course, in the palace of the king. And so he's praying that he can have the right answers to the questions when it comes up. So now we come to chapter 2. Nehemiah's request and journey, Nehemiah 1:11b to 2:10. 1b, I was cupbearer to the king. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was brought for him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. I had not been sad in his presence before. So the king asked me, why does your face look sad when you are not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart. What is a cupbearer? In the Bible, we see 3 kingdoms where a cupbearer is mentioned. The first is in Egypt, where Joseph interprets the dream of a cupbearer in Genesis 49. In the Jewish kingdom under King Solomon, 1 King 10:5, and then in the Persian kingdom in Nehemiah. The cupbearer's duty was to fill the king's cup and present it to him personally. He was to taste all the drink prior to giving it to the royal family to verify it had not been poisoned. And also, too, I wanted to mention that the month of Nisan is actually the first month of the Jewish year. In this case, I have the Jewish calendar back here, but in this case, it's starting at Tishrei, which is really incorrect. It should really start at Nisan, okay? Just so you know that that's the first month of the Jewish year. What month did Nehemiah go before the king? Nisan. Looking at the calendar comparison to the right, what does the month of Nisan compare in our calendar? March or April, depending on how it's situated. When did Nehemiah's brother come to visit him? Kislev, right up here in Kislev, if you remember. So it's actually been several months. Therefore, looking at the calendar to the right, how many civil months has Nehemiah been praying for Jerusalem? So Kislev, December, January, February, March. So about 4 months. 5 Jewish months or 4 civil months. Civil meaning our calendar. So about 5 Jewish months or 4 of civil calendar. What did the king notice about Nehemiah? That he was sad. Nehemiah 2b. I was very much afraid, but I said to the king, may the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire? Looking at the possible reasons below, why do you think Nehemiah was afraid to tell the king why he was sad? Possible reasons why Nehemiah was afraid. A. As was true in the courts of many ancient kings, it was forbidden to be sad in the presence of the king. The idea was that the king was such a wonderful person that merely being in his presence was supposed to make you forget all your problems. When Nehemiah looked sad, it could have been taken as a terrible insult to the king. King Artaxerxes had stopped the building of the walls near the start of his reign. In a letter written to King Artaxerxes, and this is what it said. The king should know that the people who came up to us from you have gone to Jerusalem and are rebuilding the rebellious and wicked city. That's what the letter said to King Artaxerxes. They are restoring the walls and repairing the foundations. And then King Artaxerxes' response, now issue an order to these men to stop work, so the city will not be rebuilt until I so order. So that's where in Ezra 4, 2 and 21, that the neighbors of Jerusalem are able to stop the building of the walls. And Nehemiah prayed and prepared for this moment for several months. Everything he plans depends on what the king says. So now back to question 1. Look at the possible reasons below. Why do you think Nehemiah was afraid to tell the king why he was sad? Both A and B, in my opinion. In the fact that he already, it's forbidden to be sad in front of the king, and he had already stopped the building of the walls. So both of those, I think, were the paramount worry that Nehemiah had. And as in the book of Esther, it actually says if the king doesn't like it, he can actually have you killed. So he might have that in mind too. Does Nehemiah tell the truth as to why his face is sad? Yes, he does. Nehemiah 2:4. The king said to me, what is it that you want? Then I prayed to God of heaven, and I answered the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah, where my ancestors are buried, so that I can rebuild it. Instead of off with his head, the king asked Nehemiah, what? What is it that you want? What did Nehemiah do quickly before he answered the king? He prayed, which is often what we need to do before we respond. What does Nehemiah ask from the king? Send me to the city in Judah where my ancestors are buried so I can rebuild it. Did Nehemiah ask to go to Jerusalem or be sent? He said he asked to be sent. In this way, he's involving the king in the rebuilding. Is Nehemiah going on a fact-finding mission, or accuse others of allowing the city to be in ruins mission, or an action mission? He's going on an action mission. He's not going to fact-find. He already heard the situation. He's not going to accuse others of why they haven't done it. He feels personally that he should do the job. Reread this chapter from the start. Does Nehemiah ever use the name of the city, Jerusalem, in his request? No, he doesn't. Why do you think this is? Again, because Artaxerxes has already terminated the walls of that city, so he doesn't want to bring that up into his memory. What do you think the king will say? Will there be any conditions? Well, it's hard to say, especially since I know the story, but Artaxerxes did, in the third year of his reign, did make that decision about stopping the walls. But he does seem to like Nehemiah. So hopefully that he will see Nehemiah as someone who he can trust to do it correctly. So Nehemiah 2:6. Then the king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked me, how long will your journey take and when will you get back? It pleased the king to send me, so I set a time. What was the main concern the king had? How long will your journey take and when will you be back? Was Nehemiah able to supply the king with his request? Yes. Therefore, if Nehemiah could already give the king a time frame, do you think he has previously designed a plan, just waiting for the approval from the king? Absolutely. Then is it okay for us to do this when we see a way forward, even if we have not yet gotten the approval of God to move forward. Absolutely. We can certainly plan, and most people do plan their lives with assuming God's will is in that plan. But you also have to be willing to change the plan, because I think somewhere it says God laughs when man makes plans. But you got to plan your life, and I'm a planner. So, that's my phraseology. But um, although we don't know the time he set here, we do know how long he did stay. In Nehemiah 5:14, he says he was in Jerusalem for 12 years. That's a long time. Who was sitting beside the king? The queen. As the Persian kings did not allow their wives to be present at their state festivals or court decisions, this must have been a private occasion. Some Bible scholars wrongly conclude that this is Esther, but this king is Artaxerxes, the king after Xerxes who married Esther. Note this date when the king gave the commandment to Nehemiah to restore the walls of Jerusalem is one of the important dates in history. Daniel tells us in Daniel 9:24-25 that there are 77s determined upon the nation of Israel from the time of the commandment to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the coming of the Messiah will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens, or 483 years. So here on the 14th of March, 445 BC, the commandment was given. 483 years later, 360-day years, Jewish calendar, Jesus made his triumphant entry into the city of Jerusalem on April 6th, 32 AD. So this is an important date. Nehemiah 2:7. I also said to him, if it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of Trans-Euphrates, so that they will provide me safe conduct until I arrive in Judah. The term Trans-Euphrates literally means anything on the other side of the Euphrates River. However, based on the land that was controlled by the Persian Empire, it is all the land from Damascus down to Egypt, bordering the Mediterranean Sea. What is the first thing that Nehemiah knew he needed for the journey? Letters to the Trans-Euphrates governors. Why? Because they were the ones that stopped the rebuilding of the wall in the first place. So they have to know that this is something that the king has decided on. Why did he need those letters? That's just what I was telling you. The governors of the Trans-Euphrates had given a lot of trouble to Ezra and the people of Jerusalem when they were building the temple. And although they were not able to stop the completion of the temple, they were able to stop the rebuilding of the wall around Jerusalem. And we see that here. We inform the king that if the city is built and its walls are restored, you'll be left with nothing in Trans-Euphrates. And the king Artaxerxes, the same king, now issue an order to these men to stop work so that the city will not be rebuilt until I so order. It's interesting that he puts that in until I so order. And we learn this more from the book of Esther, but the laws of the Medes and the Persians, whenever a law is made, it cannot be reversed or revoked, even by the king. So putting this little stipulation there gives him an option to be able to do it again when he sees the time is right. The governors of the Trans-Euphrates were quite negative to the Jews in Judea and caused a number of problems there. Why do you think that Nehemiah asked for letters for safe passage, rather than punishment or discipline for these governors? Because he knows that would not fly. He's not looking to punish people or accuse people. He's looking to do the job. And so he wants letters to give him safe passage and to say that the king is with it. And he's never looking negative to other people, against other people. Nehemiah is going to ask for many things. Why do you think he started with the letters to the governors first? Because if he can't get through the governors, he can't get through safe passage. There's no point in going. And may I have a letter to Asaph, keeper of the royal park, so that he will give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel by the temple, and for the city wall, and for the residence I will occupy? And because the gracious hand of my God was on me, the king granted my requests. That's a lot to ask for. What is the second item that Nehemiah asked for? Letter to Asaph, the keeper of the royal park of timber. Basically, he's a national park ranger. We know nothing more of this Asaph other than is written here. He's not the Asaph of the book of Psalms. It is generally believed that this royal park had to be near Jerusalem rather than near Babylon because, first, Asaph is a Jewish name, and second, it wouldn't be practical to transport timbers from Babylon across the Euphrates in over 800 miles. What three items will this timbers be used for? The beams for the gates of the citadel, and for the city wall, and for the residence that Nehemiah will occupy. The wall itself is made out of stone. So there's beams in it, but the wall is made out of stone. Did the king grant Nehemiah's request? Yes, he did. Does Nehemiah think that the king granted his request due to Nehemiah's great job he had done for the king, the great planning he had done, or that God was for it? He believes that God was for it, and that's the reason why there's a positive answer. What can we learn from this regarding God working in our lives? We need to realize that, first of all, God has a perfect man for the job. And if that man has a conviction and he's powerful behind God, that God will bless the things that he does, even when things look impossible. He will bless him to be able to do the things he does. Nehemiah 2:9. So I went to the governors of Trans-Euphrates and gave them the king's letters. The king also sent army officers and cavalry with me, which of course is logical because there's a lot of thieves and robbers on this route. And of course, eventually, by the time Nehemiah gets to Jerusalem, he's going to have a lot of stuff with him. So it's better to have protection. Other than letters for the Trans-Euphrates governors and the letter to Asaph, keeper of the royal park, what else went with Nehemiah? Army officers and cavalry. Why send army officers and cavalry with Nehemiah? Because it's a dangerous route. The distance is over 800 miles. According to Ezra 7, how long did it take Ezra to travel this distance? Now I've got to look it up. I think 4 months, but I've got to look it up. 4 months to travel the 800 miles. Ezra did. It may have taken Nehemiah a shorter period of time since they're going on horseback and they didn't have women and children with them. The average horse can travel 25 to 40 miles in a day. Therefore, the least it would have taken them is 20 days. Probably longer because they're stopping by the timber, and then that's going to be a real slow travel. What was the first stop that Nehemiah made? He stopped at the Trans-Euphrates governors' places to give them the letters. Based on our knowledge of how the governors feel about Jerusalem, why do you think Nehemiah went to them first before going to the holy city? So they wouldn't cause opposition. Oh, I have the Ezra here on the bottom that tells us how long it took. Okay, well, very good. Nehemiah 2:10. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard about this, they were very much disturbed that someone had come to promote the welfare of the Israelites. They are the enemies of the Israelites. They're the ones who got the wall stopped in the first place. They don't like the Israelites. This is where the hatred between Samaritans and the Jews start is actually during the time of Ezra. And it was when the Samaritans offered to help build the temple, and the Jews said, no, you can't build the temple. You're of mixed blood is basically what the problem was. And they are. Samaritans were of mixed blood. They were Jews that were left in the remnant of Jews that were left in the area, and they intermarried with the people, daughters and sons of the pagan nations around them. So they were mixed blood. And so the Jews said, no, you can't help us build the temple. I believe in the Jews' case, they've come back to their land. They're trying to be very, very, very careful about what they do and having it absolutely correct. So they felt that only Jews could build the temple because the temple was just for the Jews. And so that's what caused the animosity. And occurred up through the animosity occurred between Samaritans and Jews clear through Jesus's time. So, what do we know about Sanballat the Horonite, also known as Sanballat I? He was a Samaritan leader and official of the Achaemenid empire who lived in the mid to late 5th century BC. He lived in Samaria, and he had been transplanted to Samaria from the country of Moab, as the city Horon is in Moab. What do we know about Tobiah, the Ammonite official? Only what is written in this chapter. He also was transplanted to the Samaritan area from the country of Ammon. Sanballat and Tobiah are the Trans-Euphrates governors of the time. Were Sanballat and Tobiah happy that Nehemiah came with the king's approval to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem? No, 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 no. They hated the Israelites. Why were Sanballat and Tobiah against the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem? Below are a couple of theories. The Jews and Samaritans hated each other. That's absolutely true. Building up the city of Jerusalem would mean an interruption in their trade from Egypt to Persia. People would be going to Jerusalem instead of Samaria. That's true. The Samaritans had successfully stopped the rebuilding of the wall before. Now the king has changed his mind, which means their money may have to be used to build the wall as it was the temple. Because when the temple was built, money from the Trans-Euphrates had to be used to build the temple per the king's demand. So now they're worried about the same thing. Which one, or is it all of them, that you think is the reason? I think they're all out part of the reasons as to why they don't want the Jerusalem wall to be rebuilt. So now we come to the crossword. The king wanted to know how long would the journey take. When he asked Nehemiah, how long would the journey take? What did Nehemiah want to do to the walls of Jerusalem? Rebuild. Yeah. 6, Jerusalem lay in ruins and its gates were burned by fire? Destroyed by fire. Who was the king? Artaxerxes. Number 9, Nehemiah wanted these for the governors of the Trans-Euphrates. Letters. 11, the king sent army officers and cavalry with Nehemiah. 12, a cupbearer brings wine to the king. Yeah, wine to the king. 13, the timber would be for the beams of the citadel gates. Beams, yes. One down, the 2 Trans-Euphrates governors are Sanballat and Tobiah. What is Nehemiah's profession? Cupbearer. What city did Nehemiah want the king to send him to? Jerusalem. What month did this chapter happen in? Nisan. Nisan. It is Nisan, isn't it? Yeah. Nisan. Nehemiah wanted letters to Asaph of the royal park so that he would give Nehemiah what? Timber. Yeah. And that's the end of this chapter. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope to see you again. Talk to you later.